Hey, I'm Dave. Welcome to my shop. I'm Dave Plummer, a retired operating systems engineer from Microsoft going back to the MS-DOS and Windows 95 days, and I'm the original author of ZipFolders, the compressed file support in Windows. It's a crazy story that almost got me fired, and one that I've not even told to close friends and those who worked with me at the time. But it's been 25 years now, and I'm finally ready to tell you the secret history of Windows ZipFolders. A little bit of backstory is likely needed as to why I was writing software on the side to begin with. Task Manager might have begun life as a side project, but the ZipFolders was something that I wrote from start to finish at home in my den, completely separate from my day job. If you know anything about me by now, you know that I like to code. I like to code a lot, and so I'm frequently working on these side projects in order to keep myself entertained and to learn the latest technologies and trends, or at least the ones that I deem to be both important and fun to play with. It's how I got started, and it's how I still spend my time today. Like a lot of programmers my age, my first serious exposure to programming came on a Commodore 64. Though I started in BASIC like everyone else, I quickly progressed to assembly language and even worked on a few commercial games written entirely in 6502. By about 1987, I had moved on to the Amiga platform, and I was actively coding for it in C and 68000 assembly. I wrote an application called Hypercache that significantly improved the performance of Amiga hard drives and other storage devices. It's something that should have been built into their operating system, but wasn't, and Hypercache filled a notable hole in the system. I was confident it would be popular, and I didn't want to release it as shareware, as I figured it would probably sell 1 or 2 copies before it just got pirated into oblivion. Instead, I decided to make the leap to release it as a full commercial software package. There was a big difference in pricing. Shareware apps were simpler, and there was no packaging, and you paid about $5. With retail, you got a box and a manual, and you paid more like $30. It would clearly generate a lot more money to release it to retail. Now, that was a nice idea and all, except I was still a college student and I had no idea how to go about it. To complicate things further, I was still living up in Saskatchewan, where I was born and raised, and I was confident that there were no major software publishers in my local area, let alone any that specialized in Amiga software. With very few options then, I decided to self-publish it and sell it directly to wholesalers. That meant I would need that aforementioned retail packaging, including a manual and a disc and shrink wrapping and everything else. To that end, I typeset a manual up in latex of all things and printed it on the school laser printers. I drew up a cover in CorelDRAW and made a label for the floppy disk and so on. I took all the raw components to the university printing press and commissioned a batch for my first run. The big question was how many copies to invest in. How much faith did I have that I'd be able to sell them all and recover my investment? Much to the consternation of my dad, who was way more cautious than I was, I ordered 20 copies of everything. When it was ready for pickup, my girlfriend and I took everything home to staple and fold and assemble it into retail packages. Then I went about trying to sell it, from messages on BBSs and Usenet to contacting wholesalers from the backs of Amiga magazines. At first I sold 1 or 2 here or there, and eventually built some momentum by word of mouth. I bought extra floppy drives for my Amiga so I could write 4 discs at a time as the sales volume slowly increased. I was selling batches of 50 at a time to the bigger software houses and ultimately sold a few thousand copies. At perhaps $15 per copy of profit, I eventually managed to put myself through college, pay off any remaining student loans, and put a ring on my girlfriend's finger. When I was trying to secure an internship at Microsoft originally back in 1992, I actually established my first contact by reaching out to one of my Hypercache customers who had registered the software with a Microsoft.com email address. They kindly gave me the contact emails of a few Microsoft dev managers that were hiring, and I reached out directly. That led to a phone screen, which led to an interview, which led to an internship, which led to a full-time interview, and ultimately to my job there. So between paying for college and getting me my first job, it would be hard to overstate the importance of Hypercache to my future. I also did my undergraduate honors thesis on it, so I got no shortage of mileage out of it at least. This whole software on the side backstory is important in that it might allow you to understand why then, when I got to Microsoft, I was actually bold enough to ask for a moonlighting clause in my original employment contract that would allow me to continue selling my own software directly to consumers as I'd been doing for years. It turns out Microsoft had no objection, and they agreed with a stipulation that I would get my manager's approval for each project, and that of a vice president if it were directly related to my day job. Made sense to me, I took that deal. If you've been following the Windows War Stories series, then you'll recall that, as noted, Task Manager was one of the things I started at home on the side upon getting to Microsoft as a full-time developer. My plan had been to release Task Manager the same way that I had Hypercache, but when it became a favorite tool of my fellow developers on Windows NT, I decided to be a team player and just contribute it to Windows, which I did for free. No one offered me anything, and I didn't expect anything for it. I figured if it were good for the product, it would be good for the stock price, and that's mostly what mattered to me at that time. Plus, I got to work on it as my day job for a few months thereafter and had a great deal of fun doing it, so I've never regretted that decision. Except in one regard, and that's how my other shareware project was handled: ZipFolders. ZipFolders was new and unique in that whereas the conventional archive programs like WinZip were standalone applications that loaded zip files and operated on them to extract files and so on, ZipFolders was actually a shell extension. That meant, rather than being its own program, it gave the existing Windows Explorer the ability to browse down into and drag and drop to and from zip files as though they were merely folders on your disk. It made working with them rather seamless. And yet, ZipFolders was an obvious idea in a way. Once I realized that the Explorer could enumerate over any namespace that defined an iShell folder interface, I knew that all I had to do was write such an interface that exposed zip archives in the right way, and the shell itself would do the rest of the UI work. I'd be on the hook for managing the compression and the extraction and all the I/O operations, but the shell would do all of the pretty visuals, the icons, drag and drop, and so on. I started tinkering with it while I was still over in the Ole RPC team, and it really spurred my interest in the shell itself. Ultimately, I got most of my information about the shell extension architecture from a Microsoft Systems Journal magazine. I remember very clearly that the icon said Big GAC. They had a whole namespace of Big GACs that they exposed for the shell to enumerate over, and that was all I needed to see. From there, I knew enough that I could make it work for zip files. It turned out that there were two things that made the type of shell integration that I was attempting difficult. One is that at least at the time of Windows 95, if you grab a bunch of icons and drag and drop them, their arrangement on screen will be remembered, and they'll be laid out the same where you drop them. Unfortunately, it wasn't technically possible for a non-file system folder to provide that arrangement information back then, so all your icons just got default positions. That's fixed today, I believe, with new support in the shell. The second issue was that for the shell's copy engine to be able to copy the expanded files to their final locations, they have to exist somewhere in the file system first, which was a royal pain. You couldn't just copy from an arbitrary iShell folder that I provided to another, so they both had to be file system folders. Thus, I was forced to construct a temporary copy of the files that you're extracting in the temp folder and then move or copy them from there. And that's the main reason why it's slower than most of the other contenders. It winds up doing twice the disk I/O. It's possible that this temporary staging copy issue has been addressed since as well, but I don't think it's a speed demon even today, so I don't think that has. If it indeed hasn't been fixed or changed, they could go a long way to increasing performance in this area by doing exactly that. Both of these could have been addressed in the shell back at the time, and I just wasn't comfortable asking for fixes or features related to my own side project, so I just lived with the limitations as they were. With my new super zip file handling shareware almost ready to go, what to call it? I'd been using the working title of Zip Explorer, so that's what I went with. Within about a month of releasing it though, a problem. Another zip program was released by a developer out of Japan, also called Zip Explorer. I wasn't attached to Zip Explorer as a name yet, so it was easier to switch than fight. I decided on the new name of Visual Zip and went about my usual business of trying to sell it direct to end users. This time around, I opted to go the shareware route because I was competing with WinZip and similar shareware products, so I thought it made the most sense. Within a few months, I was selling about a dozen copies a day, making up the discs and labels and mailers, basically everything except the actual shrink wrapping, and then sending them on their way by post. It was a nice hobby that brought in a few extra dollars every month and gave me a creative outlet at a time when most of my day job was porting work. And that is when it started to get complicated. The software developer in Japan that I mentioned earlier somehow knew or directly reached out to a senior developer on the Win95 shell team. I'm not into naming names, so I'll just call him Hiroshi. They complained vehemently that it was unfair that they should have to compete with a Microsoft employee in the shareware space. Hiroshi apparently was sympathetic and agreed with their stance. Did he then swing by my office to chat about our philosophical differences? No. Did he contact my manager to express his concerns formally? No. He started with the nuclear option. He went directly to Human Resources to have me summarily fired from Microsoft. When I heard what was going on, I was of course worried, but perhaps not as worried as I maybe should have been at the time. My manager and a senior developer on our team went to bat for me and wound up spending a few sleepless nights over it, no doubt. They pointed out that I had obtained permission to work on it in advance and had been doing so quite openly. I hadn't used any trade secret or proprietary knowledge in the code, and since most of it had come from a public MSJ sample anyway. Combined with the moonlighting writer in my contract, it seemed to me at least that I had all my ducks in a row. That's when Hiroshi struck a potentially fatal blow. He noted that a shell extension, since I had since changed teams and now worked on the NT shell team, was close enough to my day job that I should have vice presidential approval. If nothing else in life, I am a fixer of problems. For reasons related to the way I'm wired, I simply cannot wait. I perseverate. I will phone, call, contact, harass, and annoy whoever I need to in order to force a decision or resolution to a problem that is perplexing me. I was self-aware enough to never go around my own boss, because that's almost always bad form, but not much would stop me from going around yours if I needed to. To that end, I decided I should escalate it all the way to our senior vice president, right below Bill Gates. I'd get my answer, and it'd be swift. From all appearances, his first review of the matter was similar to my own, but given an external software company had complained, he decided it should go to Microsoft Legal to be sure. He looped in the general counsel of the entire company, our top attorney, to render a formal internal legal opinion on the matter. And this all happened within the span of about a single morning following my request. What came back was one of the shortest and sweetest emails I'd ever read. It came from the general counsel, and it was 6 words long. I have no problem with this. I was free to continue on exactly as I had been. And ironically, it turned out to be a very good thing that this forcing function had transpired, because a few months later, the whole thing was about to get even more complicated than it had been. That's because I was at home early one morning getting ready for work when I got a call from work. It was someone in the acquisitions department, and she wanted to confirm that I was the creator of ZipFolders, as Microsoft wanted to purchase it from me for inclusion in the operating system itself. Now, my immediate thoughts were probably exactly what yours were. I wonder what Microsoft would pay for such a thing. There was only one way to find out, so I offered to stop by her office to talk about it. That seemed to startle her. She demurred and said that I should talk to Microsoft Travel and maybe the legal department first. Now, I'm a little mind-blind and all, but I had no idea why she was acting like it was so odd. At the time, I lived within walking distance of the Microsoft campus, so why would I need the travel department involved? After a few minutes of uncomfortable back and forth, we realized the problem. She had had no idea that I worked for Microsoft, just as she did. She had researched the product and cold called the author, who happened to be me, and reached out about the acquisition not knowing that I'd worked a few hundred feet away. So what does Microsoft pay for something like that? Well, it turns out to be a nice little windfall, but not a giant payday. That's in part, no doubt, because I was in a tough negotiating position. If I did not sell it to Microsoft, they would either A, develop their own software, or more likely B, just buy a different one. No matter which way they went, I would have to stop selling mine or leave the company because I couldn't exactly compete with my own employer once they'd entered that market. As a result, I cheerfully accepted their first, best, and only offer. It was enough to purchase a quality Chevrolet motor car, but only a pre-owned one. In the end, I showed up on Monday in a red Corvette, and ZipFolders has been part of Windows ever since. The final hurdle was the code itself. ZipFolders was not a passion project, something carefully crafted as a love letter to my future coding self. It was more of a quick and dirty shell extension, the first one I'd ever written, cobbled together from a sample, and it wasn't the tidiest code in the world. It also wasn't code that I ever expected another human to ever see. Furthermore, it was based on MFC, which they were unlikely to accept for an operating system component. I wasn't about to rewrite the whole thing, but I did clean it up to the extent that I removed the MFC dependencies by writing a little class layer of my own that substituted for the core MFC functionality that I had been leaning on. On the plus side, I was an NT developer at heart, so the code was already 32-bit, Unicode, worked on RISC, and was ready to roll in the NT shell as well as the Win95 side. ZipFolders actually shipped first in the Windows 95 Plus pack. I think it became part of the operating system with Windows XP in 98, or possibly as early as NT4, but it remains there to this very day. Somehow in my career, I was tasked with projects that, it turns out, would have a very long lifespan. 25 years is an eternity in computer software, and with things like Task Manager, ZipFolders, Format, Product Activation, and even the desktop shell itself, I seem to have several components that are still up and going to this very day. And I guess that's all good news when you go to make a video series, so please be sure to subscribe to my channel if you find this kind of thing interesting, entertaining, or informative. That way I'll be encouraged to make more episodes and you'll be notified of their availability when I do so. Win-win. Speaking of which, I'm not selling anything and I don't have any Patreons. I'm just in this for the subs and likes, so please be sure to leave me one of each before you go. Thanks for joining me out in the shop today, and as always, in the meantime and in between time, I hope to see you next time here in Dave's Garage.
This little chair will be waiting for one of you, and a rocking chair for another who likes to rock, and a big armchair for two more to curl up in. All next time on Dave's Garage.